Hello everyone and welcome to another video in this Java series. So previously we talked about the concept of encapsulation. Along with encapsulation, there are two other concepts that play hand in hand in helping you make your Java programs more structured and reusable. These two topics are going to be inheritance and polymorphism. So, as you start building more programs, and now that you know all the complex things you can do within your Java program, things are starting to come together. And as we learn classes, you see that things are starting to become more organized. But again, you can have multiple classes and multiple objects that you can work with inside of your Java programs. So, really, when you're coming to create like complex Java programs, basically you'll never be using just one class. You'll create various classes, and all of these classes may connect in some way. But as you're creating these classes, they may have some relation or shared traits or behaviors. So let's talk about what inheritance is and how this ties to that. So, inheritance is basically when one class inherits or just takes the fields and methods from another class. So, how it works is consider that you have a parent class. This parent class is pretty much the first class you would make. And it's going to have some sort of fields and methods in that class that you believe can be shared in other classes as well. So that leads us to the child class, or the subclass, which is the class that would inherit or automatically get whatever the parent class has. One thing to note is you can have one parent class, but you can have multiple child classes built from that parent. So the child class is basically used if you want to add new methods that maybe the parent doesn't have or fields, and it can also override the parent's methods. So basically customize the behavior that it has. So this means, for example, when you were born, your parents both have different traits. You may not have all of the traits of your parent, but you have some of them, and the same thing is here. Also, you may not act how your parents act. So you may have your own behaviors or you may have your own features. And this is basically the concept of that. So to use inheritance in Java, you would use the keyword extends. So extends is basically just used to tell the Java compiler that one class is an extension or inherits from another class. So if we take a look at the syntax we have on the screen, you see that we have class parent class. And basically that would be our first class that we created that has fields and methods within it for a specific object. Now if you take a look at the class child class, you see in the middle or after we name the class, we have that keyword extends. So extends goes after the class that you're creating, and then you put the class that you are inheriting from, or the parent class, after extends. So it's basically saying this child class is going to be an extension or an inheritance of this parent class. Now, here's an example with some actual data in it. We have this parent class. As you see, the class is called name or animal. And in there, we have a string name for our field, and we have a method that says eat. So it's basically saying that this animal is going to be eating. So this is the parent class. So if take note, when we say class animal, there is no extends at this moment because this is the parent class. Now, when we get to the child class, you see we have that keyword extends. So you see, we now have that new class we're creating, which in this case is dog, and we're saying it's going to extend from the animal class we just previously saw. Now take note, in this case, we do not have that variable name because technically this class dog will automatically have a variable called name because it is extending the animal class. So we don't need to replicate name here, and we also don't need to replicate the eat method either because the dog is going to automatically receive those fields and methods. The only thing different is an animal might not necessarily bark, but a dog would. And this would be the case where it has its own methods. So in this class, we have a method called bark because not all animals bark, but a dog does. So therefore, that is why it has its own method. Now, if we were to create a class called cat, we might say void meow. So this is showing you how technically you can use a parent class to inherit common things that maybe all objects that are related to that class may have, while you still have the ability to customize the class based on what that object is going to be. So again, what happened? Basically, we had that dog class and it inherited from the animal class. So it got name the variable and eat the method automatically. The only thing different is dog then added its own new behavior, which is bark. And again, you can add as many new fields and methods to the class as you would like, but since we're just doing a simple example, we're just showing the case of one new method or behavior. So basically, to reiterate, the subclass is automatically going to get everything that the parent class has, and you can add more. There's no limit to as much more as you would like to add. That is totally up to you and your use case. But as we mentioned, because the parent gives you automatic methods that it has, sometimes there will be the case where we need to use method overriding. So yes, we have technically covered this topic before, but now it's going to be used inside of the cases of the classes a little bit more. So there may be a case where you receive a method from the parent that you don't necessarily want to be exactly the same as the parent. So you could use method overriding. So the child class is just going to replace whatever method it inherited from its parents, and it gives it its own behavior. But basically what will happen is, of course, with method overriding, is that the method name and the parameters are going to be the same. So if we take a look here, you see we have that animal class, and we also have the dog class, which is an extension or an inherited class from animal. Both of them have a method called make sound. Both of them have no parameters. However, the difference is one says some sound and the other says bark. Again, when it's being more specific inside of that subclass or that child class. So in this case, you can method override. It works exactly how it did when we previously learned it, but this is just to show you an example of how it works when you are working with inheritance, classes, and objects. So inheritance is what's used to create the relationship. But now we're going to get into the topic of polymorphism, which is used when relationships are needed to be flexible and reusable. So again, let's review the child class. The child class is basically going to share the same parent type because again, the parent type will be the name of that parent class and the same method names. And this will make more sense as we go along into polymorphism. So let's go ahead and take a look at what polymorphism is. So polymorphism is when one parent type can work with many child objects. So if we take a look at this example we have, you see that we have a object we are creating that is a animal object, or it comes from the animal data type, excuse me. So animal is the parent type we are using, similar to int, string. That is what we're giving it. We're saying the type is going to be of type animal instead of type string or type int or type boolean, because we are trying to make an object that is pertaining to that animal type or that animal class. So in this example, we're saying that animal A is going to equal new dog. The reason this works and the reason we're not saying dog A equals new dog is because technically dog inherits from animal. So by default, it is of type animal. However, the dog is associated to animal because it is an animal. But we're still having a different type or an object that relates to that class animal. So in this case, we have animal A equals new dog. Another way we could have had this, let's say we had a monkey class. So it'll be animal M equals new monkey, and so on and so forth. Now, when we say animal A is going to equal new dog, it basically will use the information it has from the dog class, because remember, it inherits everything animal class has on top of what it has in its own. So basically, when it creates the object, everything from dog and animal are going to be attached to this animal object of A. So when we say A dot make sound, it would use the dog's version to make a sound. Now, in the case that the dog object does not have a make sound method, but animal does, then it would use the animal make sound method. And that's basically how polymorphism works. You see that we have a parent type, and it can be used with as many child objects such as cat, dog, monkey as we need. So you have one parent, multiple child objects. Here is an example of basically what I was just mentioning. You see all of them have the same type of animal, but they all have a different object or connect to a different class: dog, cat, bird. And all of them will behave differently based on what it says in its class. So in this case, our dog would say bark, our cat would say meow, and the bird would say chirp. Again, they all have similarities, but they all have their different behaviors. So why do we need to know this? As you're starting to create more complex code, you're going to start needing to reuse some things because you don't want to write the same code over and over again to deal with specific items. And this is why this is important. Inheritance and polymorphism will help you save a lot of time writing because it will allow you to reuse a class you've already created but make it custom to whatever you're trying to do. So this will allow you to write your code once, and then you can use it how you may and customize it as you need. But it allows you to also add as many new child classes as you want to without necessarily having to change the old code as well. Again, you can keep the old code and add on a new code or a new revised code to continue working with your objects. But there is one thing or a few things you want to avoid. So, what one thing you can't do is when you're using the parent type or the parent class, you cannot access or call any child specific methods because it does not work like that. Again, the parent comes first. So if the parent comes first, they will not have the same methods or the same fields as the child because the child would be created after. So they cannot go back and access those features. Only a child can go back and access the parent's features. Also, you cannot assign a parent object to a child variable. Again, because the parent was created first and the child is not inheriting, or the parent is not inheriting from the child, that is why you can't do that. So it really just goes parent gives to the child. It does not work as child can give to the parent. So that's just a way to think about it. So now that we basically got the overall idea of inheritance and polymorphism, there is another keyword that will play a part when you're using these terms or these concepts. So there's a keyword called super. And super is used because it's going to allow the child class to access things from the parent class. Because again, technically, you're when you're working in a class, you typically access what's in that class directly. Now, when we use inheritance, we can access what's in that animal class. And to do that, super would be used. So if we take a look at this example, we see that our animal class has a constructor of animal that's going to be taking in a name. And in our dog class, you see that we are calling super and dog. And basically, super is going to be the same thing as calling animal dog. Except here, because it is inherited, when you use super, it automatically knows that we need to find the parent class or the class that is being extended in this class. So in this class, when we say super, it automatically knows animal based off of that extension we stated. So instead of saying animal dog, we're just saying super dog here, which will then call that animal constructor. So now to put this all together, inheritance is what allows a child class to extend a parent class, which basically means that we want to get their fields and their methods and reuse it within the child class. Polymorphism is when the parent type can refer to a child object. So we can use that parent as a data type in theory, and it will connect to that child object or that child class, which basically allows us to then use the animal class or parent with any other animal child objects that we have, such as dog, cat, monkey, bird. And we also have super, which is used for us to call the parents constructors or methods when we need to use it inside of our child class so that we, for example, if we use method overriding, but we want to use the parent's method instead of the child's method, super would be useful. So this is how it all connects together to make one piece. So overall, today we covered inheritance. We also looked at polymorphism and the super key word. Now that we've covered these topics go hand in hand with our previous topics of classes, objects, and encapsulation. So if you are not too familiar with that or you need to refresh on that, once you refresh on that and review this again, it will make a lot more sense as you have to understand how classes, objects work before you can understand these concepts. So, thank you for sitting with me again for another lecture. And of course, we will be back with a coding tutorial to show you how we are going to apply inheritance, polymorphism, encapsulation with our classes and our objects. So, I will see you over there.